Man is the measure of all things.
So said the Greek philosopher Protagoras during the golden age of Greece. Not a startling point of view to us in the 20th century, but to the people of the 15th century, it was tantamount to revolution, and worse, heresy. For 1,000 years, man had dwelt in the dark ages of ignorance, deprivation, and the belief that his miserable time on earth could be tolerated only because it was a waiting room to Judgment Day and the hereafter. The huge cathedrals that pointed skyward encouraged man to believe he was tiny, insignificant, and helpless to control his own destiny. Then, in a small town on the Arno River, in the Italian province of Tuscany, arose a group of men bursting with creativity, confident in themselves as masters of their own fate. Men who had rediscovered the proud heritage of ancient Greece and Rome. That heritage, so long in the doldrums, now enjoyed a rebirth, a renaissance, the like of which has never been repeated in the history of mankind. The candle of Western civilization, flickering low, was rekindled in Florence, cradle of the Renaissance. If there was a single occasion to mark the beginning of the Renaissance, the dedication of Florence's new cathedral, Santa Maria del Fiore, on March 25th, 1436, could be said to be that event. Everyone came to celebrate. Church dignitaries, statesmen, diplomats, artists, musicians, and most important of all, bankers. For it was the Florentine banker who, more than any other, by substituting money and credit for the medieval barter, brought prosperity to Florence. The florin became international currency, the soundest in the world. Money flowed in and out of Florence. Prosperous, these bankers became patrons of the arts, and with their patronage came the Renaissance. Now all the eyes of the newly rich, energetic Florentines gazed skyward to the mighty cupola that crowned their new cathedral. Though building had begun in the late 13th century, construction had bogged down because no architect had the knowledge or skill to dome its gaping 140-foot wide octangular space. Architects from all over the world were summoned, but none could do the job until Filippo Brunelleschi stepped forward with a plan. Starting 180 feet above the ground, Brunelleschi proposed to set 8 massive ribs soaring skyward from the angles of the supporting octagon to a point almost 100 feet higher, where they would converge at the base of a lantern tower. He planned to conceal them from view by adding 2 minor ribs between each major one, 24 in all, to make an inner shell. Then, reinforcing all with wooden beams and iron clasps at key points, he would fill the inner and outer shells with masonry. The structure is, in truth, an 8-sided Gothic vault, but by concealing the elements with a smooth external silhouette, Brunelleschi crossed the bridge into Renaissance architecture. But it wasn't easy to convince the wardens of the church to let him have a go at it. Giorgio Vasari, the architect biographer, writes of the affair,
Filippo said to them, "Great things always present great difficulties in their execution, and this particular one is especially hard to solve. However, I will say that if the work is entrusted to me, I shall resolutely set myself to find a means of vaulting it."
Many of the townspeople thought him crazy, and little boys chased after him saying, "There goes the madman." More importantly, The other artists and masters demanded to see a model of his plan, in detail. Brunelleschi refused. When they persisted, he proposed, as a test of their ability, that whoever among them could make an egg stand upright on a flat marble surface, he should make the cupola. He produced an egg, and all the masters tried, but no one succeeded. Then they passed the egg to Brunelleschi, who lightly tapped it on the end, cracking the shell slightly, and the egg stood up. And all the artists cried out that they could have done that themselves. But Filippo laughed and said that after they saw his design, they would also know how to construct the cupola. So it was, at length, left to the great Brunelleschi to crown the city. Across the small piazza, center of Florence's religious life, is the old Romanesque baptistry in black and white marble. Its splendid medieval ceiling, made up of thousands upon thousands of precious and semi-precious stones, looked down on the baptizing of every baby born in Florence. A huge Christ in majesty, surrounded by hundreds of stories of the Bible, served as a medieval picture book for those, the majority, who could not read. Already glorying in the new north doors, the baptistry would soon be blessed with a set of magnificent eastern doors, cast in bronze by the master Lorenzo Ghiberti. Ghiberti was not handed the project willy-nilly. He had to compete with the greatest sculptors in the world, including Brunelleschi. 34 experts judged the sample panels each artist submitted. The subject was the sacrifice of Isaac. Brunelleschi's entry hangs in the Bargello today, a worthy entry, but Ghiberti, not yet 20, won out over all with this dynamic work. Sculpted in deep and shallow relief, it took Ghiberti more than 40 years to complete the doors. His signature, the bald, protruding head of the artist, is placed in one of the medallions. When Michelangelo first saw the completed doors, he was asked his opinion.
They are so fine they would grace the entrance to paradise.
Next to the cathedral stands the slim and graceful Campanile by Giotto, rising 269 feet in the air. Said the poet Robert Browning,
And of all I saw, and of all I praised, the most to praise and the best to see was the startling bell tower Giotto raised.
Giotto was like all his compatriots, full of confidence and unimpressed with high muckety-mucks from outside Florence. Not even the Pope. If Brunelleschi said to the Pope,
Just give me a point, Your Holiness, where I can fix my lever, and I'll show you what I can do,
then Giotto got the same message across without saying a word. When the Vicar of Christ asked him for a sample of his work, Giotto simply drew a perfect circle freehand in red pencil. The Pope got the idea. This man had no need, like ordinary artists, to submit plans and drawings. Indeed, all of Florence had small fear of popes. At one point, acting through their bishops, they excommunicated the Pope. An inscription was put up on the Palazzo Vecchio during the siege of Florence in 1529.
Jesus Christ, King of the Florentine people, elected by popular decree.
No Vicar of Christ for these Democrats. Among the energetic bankers who brought prosperity to Florence, there was one family that stood out from all the rest. Its name, de' Medici. In them, the Florentines experienced rare good fortune, At the head of the family, at this turning point in Western civilization, was a man who combined all the shrewdness and financial genius to accumulate a large fortune and all the political wisdom to dominate the city, keeping dissident factions under control. Cosimo was indeed a smart cookie. He never assumed a title of authority, neither prince, king, nor even president. He knew his townsmen's passion for liberty. Thus, when Cosimo decided to build a new house, he rejected Brunelleschi's plans for a grand palace, observing,
"Envy was a plant not to be watered."
instead, he chose a simple design by Brunelleschi's pupil, Michelozzo, for the Medici palace. When it was finished, he took the advice of the master artist Donatello and collected antique statuary for his garden, encouraging young sculptors to work there. Cosimo's one indulgence in vanity was his desire to trace his lineage back to ancient times. He hired that consummate artist and scoundrel Benvenuto Cellini, who was not deeply interested in historical truth as long as you could pay his price, to sculpt a bronze statue of Cosimo as Perseus beheading the dreaded Medusa. That statue still stands where it was originally placed, in the Loggia Lanzi, named for the German lancers Cosimo stationed there to keep the citizenry in line. Perseus, as Greek myth has it, was a product of the union of Zeus, king of the gods, and the poor, unfortunate Danae, to whom the all-powerful Zeus came in a shower of gold. A singularly appropriate theme, gold, to make Perseus an ancestor of the rich Cosimo. The clever Cellini has idealized Cosimo's face for Perseus and sculpted his own on the back of the helmet. The Loggia Lanzi, built at the end of the 14th century on the Piazza della Signoria, is a veritable outdoor sculpture gallery. Rounding the corner of the piazza from the Loggia Lanzi is the Palazzo Vecchio, also called the Signoria. In the summer of 1300, it became the seat of government. Here it stands in typical Florentine austere but virile beauty. Its tower pierces the air like a needle. Its medieval rough-hewn walls a symbol of Florentine civic pride. In front of the palace, the sculpture gallery continues. Here is Judith by Donatello, in her hand the head of Holofernes. And here stands the proud Marzacco, the lion of Florence, leaning on a lily. Here is Hercules by Bandinelli, and there the equestrian statue of Cosimo by Giambologna. And over there, the statue of Neptune by Amanati. The Neptune is called Il Biancone, the great white man. Legend says he was a mighty river god, turned into a statue because he spurned the love of women. When the full moon shines, so the story goes, he comes to life and walks around the piazza chatting with the other statues. But dominating the square, the town, and indeed the world, a marble metaphor for the Renaissance, is Michelangelo's David. Though it stood here for hundreds of years, the wise Florentines have removed the original to the Accademia for protection from the rain and snow. Nonetheless, they were careful to place a copy in the piazza to remind everyone what the David stands for and what Florence gave the world. Before it became a statue, the block of marble from which it was sculpted was called the Giant. It was a huge block, 18 feet high, cut or badly mauled by the sculptor Agostino de Antonio. It lay for 40 years in the workshop of the cathedral until Michelangelo, knowing of its existence, everyone in Florence knew of it, asked for the giant. The wardens of the church thought it worthless and gave it to him. Thus the giant became David, the giant killer, a magnificent symbol of Florence's love of liberty. These statues in the civic square were placed there not merely to be admired, but as lessons in government. Lessons like death to tyranny, the importance of liberty, the desirability of harmony, especially to merchants who cannot tend to business while there is fighting going on, and the indestructibility of the marble, stone, and bronze from which they were cast serve as a reminder that good government should be permanent and stable. The Palazzo Vecchio itself bears a low terrace fronted by a balustrade called the Aringhiera. The Aringhiera was the platform where political orators made their speeches. The Florentines loved speeches, and where decrees were read to the people by the signori, the leaders of the town. From Aringhiera we get the word harangue. That the dome of Santa Maria del Fiore is impressive even to this day, there is no disputing. But the new spirit of the Renaissance can more easily be grasped in the small Pazzi chapel next to the church of Santa Croce. Here is no gigantic, intimidating structure, but a small building of intimate, classical, pure proportions. The harmonious spacings of columns of the portico or porch, the balance of horizontal and vertical lines, the symmetrical, lightly adorned surface make this small edifice a prototype for all Renaissance architecture. Nowhere in Florence is it more appropriate to remember the words, "Man is the measure of all things." Next door, in the large church of Santa Croce, which was flooded by the waters of the Arno on November the 4th, 1966, lie the tombs of giants of the Renaissance. The poet Dante, the sculptor Michelangelo, Ghiberti of the famous doors, and Galileo, the astronomer, who proved that the earth revolved around the sun. The small Bardi chapel in the church of Santa Croce contains yet another watershed in the history of art, murals depicting the life of St. Francis by Giotto. These murals demonstrate the conquest of reason over medieval obscurity. The Bargello, formerly a palace, now the National Museum, was begun in 1254. Massive as a fortress, its courtyard is encrusted with the coats of arms of many Florentine families. In the upper gallery sits a statue personifying Architettura, and beyond, a world-famous bronze of Mercury by Cellini. Inside is the first life-size bronze and the first nude sculpted since the days of antiquity, the strangely beautiful David by Donatello. It was commissioned once again by the great Cosimo de' Medici sometime in the year 1440. David stands alone, in the confident attitude of the victor over the vanquished, a sword in his right hand, a stone in his left. A local and typically Florentine touch is the Tuscan's shepherd's hat he wears, which throws his face in shadow and accentuates the thin, adolescent body. Across the Arno stands the huge Pitti Palace, built by the Pitti family to outdo the Medici. So grand and so expensive was it that the Pittis went broke soon after it was completed. At the back, are the beautiful Borboli gardens, where festivals are held even today. The gardens are a paradise of green shrubbery, darker green pines, statuary set into niches, long, cool, green lawns, and romantic grottos, like the Buontalenti Grotto, built in 1583. Next to the Palazzo Vecchio is perhaps the greatest treasure chest of Renaissance art in the world, the Uffizi Gallery. Erected by order of Cosimo and opened to the public in 1581, this grand Renaissance palace was designed by Giorgio Vasari to contain the offices, Uffizi, of the Medici. Among its riches, there are some that stand above all the rest. First and foremost, the Botticelli room, with its Birth of Venus, Primavera, and several Madonnas. Sandro Botticelli, the name means little barrel, was born in 1444. He was a sickly boy who soon showed great promise as an artist. Under the patronage of Lorenzo the Magnificent, grandson of Cosimo, he began the Birth of Venus.
From the midst of the sea there emerged a divine face of an appearance worthy of veneration even by the gods. Then gradually I saw a whole shining figure rising out of the sea. Her hair, most abundant in its richness, flowed yieldingly around her divine neck in slight curves, fluttering luxuriously.
The goddess floats across a green sea on a pink shell, gently blown by zephyrs. On the shore, ready to clothe her in a flowery mantle, is one of the hours. It is a work of supreme beauty, saturated in liquid poetry, equaled only by the Primavera nearby.
Sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright, the bridal of the earth and sky. Sweet spring, full of sweet days and roses, a box where sweets compacted lie.
Also in the Uffizi hangs the Annunciation by Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo, more than any other, was the quintessential Renaissance man. Painter, sculptor, architect, scientist, inventor. Vasari says of him,
The heavens often rain down the richest gifts on human beings naturally, but sometimes with lavish abundance bestow upon a single individual beauty, grace, and ability, so that he distances all other men.
Not to be overlooked in the Uffizi is the magnificent Battle of San Romano by Paolo Uccello, painted around 1456. Here are warriors encased in armor, heavy-hoofed horses, shields, banners, trumpets, bows. Playing with foreshortening as though he has discovered a new toy, which indeed he had, Uccello's picture delights children who see these steeds as carousel horses. Any talk of Florence must eventually come round to Michelangelo. He was a strange, irascible, proud man who fought with everybody. His father told him,
Have yourself rubbed down, but never wash.
And he seems to have taken the advice. He is said to have smelled horribly. When working, he would eat only a crust of bread. The Florentine pride and passion for greatness went beyond all limits with Michelangelo. He would accept only God for his rival. In the new sacristy of the Chiesa San Lorenzo, the parish church of the Medici, these famous tombs were designed by the artist so that Giuliano de' Medici appears as action and Lorenzo as a thinker. It was a complete break with tradition, which said that the dead man must be portrayed lying down. In front are the allegories of dawn, twilight, night and day. These figures, with the Medici behind them, unite in symbolic significance to tell of the inexorable flow of time and the relationship between man and eternity. High above the red-tiled roofs of Florence, flashing green and white and gold into the sun, stands a perfect example of Florentine Romanesque, the church of San Miniato al Monte, covered with colored marble in a pattern that is a Tuscan speciality. The dark green and white marble is arranged in charming patterns, lozenges, diamonds, wavy lines, rosettes, suns, stars, and wheels. It stands on what was once the cemetery where early Christians were buried. Nearby, the Viale Michelangelo leads to the Piazzale Michelangelo, where yet another copy of the David looks out over the city.
River and bridge and street and square lay mine as much at my beck and call through the live, translucent bath of air as the sights in a magic crystal ball.
Looking, gazing out, one sees the Duomo, the needle tower of the Palazzo Vecchio, the honey-colored arches of the Ponte Vecchio, the medieval tower of the Badia, and one contemplates the Florentines and what they did first. Dante was the first to write in his native Italian. Brunelleschi, first to raise a massive dome since ancient days. Donatello sculpted the first nude of the Renaissance. The poet Petrarch was the first humanist. Boccaccio was the first to produce literary criticism. Machiavelli was the first political scientist. Their philosopher Giannozzo Manetti summed it up.
All the things we see are ours, and therefore human because made by man. Ours are the paintings, ours the sculptures, the craftsmanship, the sciences, ours the knowledge, ours all the infinite inventions, ours the language and the letters.
The peculiar beauty of Florence and the Tuscan landscape is awesome. The clipped and cultivated countryside is laid out in delicate splashes of green, silver-green olive trees, yellow-green figs, blue-green grapevines, dark-green cypress and parasol pines. On a summer night, looking out to the Arno from the Lungarno Vespucci, or across the rooftops, or down from the Piazzale Michelangelo, one can well imagine what it was like to live here in the Renaissance. But one need not look back. The Florence of today is probably more like what it was then than we think. It is, as then, a town of craft and small industry. The Mercato Nuovo, a 16th century marketplace, sells leather and embroidery and straw goods just as it did hundreds of years ago. The nose of the porcellino, the suckling pig, sculpted in the 16th century, is rubbed daily by the passers-by to bring good luck, just as it was then. The shops on the Ponte Vecchio are filled with gold handicraft, as they were then. Oh, to stop on the bridge in front of the bust of that bounder Cellini and imagine that he winks at me. To gaze up once more at Giotto's bell tower. To feel the cool embrace of the Pazzi Chapel. to drink in the gates of paradise, thrill to the needle tower of the Signoria. Is that a Medici I hear, haranguing the public? Or is it the monk, Savonarola? To pause in the shadow of the David, or linger at sunset on the Piazzale Michelangelo. To look across the red-tiled rooftops of the City of Flowers and see again the city that is a metaphor for mankind's greatest achievements. Florence, cradle of the Renaissance.